Welcome, everyone, and members of the public to the State Water Resources Control Board, Division of Drinking Water, expert panel review of the proposed criteria for direct potable reuse meeting number 2. I'm Kevin Hardy, Executive Director of the National Water Research Institute, and we welcome you to today's meeting. Next slide. As I mentioned, this is meeting number 2. I think I should let everyone know that in the wake of meeting number 1, we've had a series of working group meetings and have been working on the steps and the key issues with respect to this review. And we're eager to.
I got it. Thank you.
He's in, and we're eager to continue this work. So next slide. Everybody has heard this before, but we're always proud to talk about NWRI for just a few minutes at the top of these programs. We are the nation's collaborative resource for the advancement of water resources, science, policy, and innovation. We're the independent expert advisory services provider of choice for challenging water quality, water resource management, and related innovation issues. And what we try to do is provide insight and understanding of current and future issues in water science and technology. Next slide. This is the expert panel that has been selected for this project. Your co-chairs are James Crook and Adam Olivieri. Your panelists are Dick Bull, Jorg Drevis, Chuck Gerba, Chuck Haas, Amy Pruden, Joan Rose, Shane Snyder, Jackie Taylor, George Chabanaglas, and Mike Weiner. And we want to welcome Shane Snyder, our most recent and 28th Clark Prize laureate. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the expert panel process to date. As you know, NWRI received the contract in March. We engaged the co-chairs in April. The panelists were confirmed and engaged in May, and that leaked into June. But we worked a lot on the project scope and finalized that out by June. As you know, we had our first full panel meeting in August of 2021. And then I mentioned the working groups, and you can see the kind of the dates as they populate here on the screen. The pathogen working group met in September. The source control working group met in October, as did the TMF working group. In November, the chemical working group met, and full panel meeting number 2 is here today. So we'll get started in just a few minutes, go over the agenda on that. But where we are in the process is that we're working as a group of people kind of collaborating, the expert panel and the staff at DDW, to clarify, to resolve, and to think about additional process for the key concerns that have been identified thus far in the panel's review. So we're very early in our work. The quality of the review, I think we've been able to identify the issues that are not going to be on our radar, and we feel like that are not going to be a part of the review. But there are a number of issues that do require some clarification, some resolution, additional resolution, or some additional process to resolve. So we're looking forward to doing that work here in the next few months, and we'll be looking to have meeting number 3 very early in next year, probably in January if we can get everybody scheduled. Might leak into February. So next slide. Our objectives for today's meeting, where we're trying to process these key issues, is to present the panel's status on the review of the draft DPR criteria that have been out for a while now. Presentations from the DDW staff on the draft DPR criteria. These will be driven by some of the interrogatories presented by the panel as a result of the review to date. And then we want to provide some time at the end for public comments if there are any, so that we make sure that we have an appropriate mechanism for folks who have not had an opportunity to be heard as we make these considerations and take our next steps. Next slide. Here's our agenda today. It's a simple one. We're in the midst of our welcomes, and if I can finish in a minute, we'll be on time. We'll have a panel report out to kind of kick the meeting off from the chairs, kind of put today's work in some more specific context. Then we'll receive some presentations from DDW on the DPR criteria topics, again, that are driven by the review interrogatories developed by the panels thus far. At 11:30, we've reserved some time for public comments that I will facilitate, and we intend to adjourn at 12 noon. Next slide. So here are the meeting ground rules. First, I should have said this earlier, this meeting is being recorded. We appreciate your patience. And as we all know, these remote meetings, we're all getting really good at them. But again, let's keep ourselves muted unless you're recognized to speak. That'll save some bandwidth. If you keep your camera turned off, that'll do some bandwidth as well. GoToMeeting allows for internet or phone audio, but we want to know be able to identify the folks who are here. So if you have logged in by phone, make sure that you use your name, use the audio pin, and keep that phone number handy because you might get kicked off. We noticed some kind of instability there on the phone. If you want to communicate at any point in time, use the chat feature. It's very efficient, very effective, but you can also be dangerous. So make sure you're careful as you use the chat feature. Hey, you know what? We've been working hard at this for a long time. We all know that we've got our own approaches to remaining present and minimizing our multitasking, but we do encourage you to take the breaks that you need to stay engaged. Want to focus on Q&A today for the expert panel members. And once again, want to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded. Next slide. For those of you who are interested in making a comment and to speak during the public session comment session, I'm sorry, we got these 3 requests for you. First, you need to send an email to DDW staff. That'll get you the special link and passcode. And the email address is there, DDW Recycled Water at waterboards.ca.gov. Make sure you populate the subject line correctly. We're at DPR criteria expert panel meeting number 2. And in the body of the email, we need you to provide the following information: your name, who you represent, whether you're going to attend by video conference or telephone. And if you're going by phone, we just need the last 3 digits for your phone number from which you intend to call so that we can properly identify you in the queue. So if you've got any questions as a person who wants to make a public comment, feel free to use the chat function so that you feel confident as you make that email to get your comment heard. Next slide. Okay, well, I haven't gone too far over, and at this point, I'm going to hand it off to our intrepid co-chairs, Mr. James Crook and Adam Olivieri, for their part of the program. Adam, Jim, take it away.
So I'll do this part of the discussion. Welcome everybody, and I guess good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and hopefully not good night, Shane. Next slide. Next slide. What I'd like to do here is just provide a very brief, Kevin already went through introductions, so I'll hit the panel schedule very quickly, and then I'll also hit some of the next goals and provide a brief status of some of the working notes that the panel has on the existing draft criteria and where we're engaging with DDW, or will be engaging with DDW. Next slide. Next slide. We've already done introductions. In terms of schedules, so this is meeting number 2. We've got already scheduled, and I think Jing has already posted it on the State Water Board website for January 26th. And we've already posted the February 28th meeting, and the 5th is to be determined. And we will continue even after those 4 or 5 meetings to work with DDW during the administrative procedures process of developing the regulations. Next slide. The panel very much appreciates the quality of material prepared so far by DDW as well as the WRF researchers. The body of work is extremely important to California as well as to other organizations nationally and internationally. I'd like to make a comment here on behalf of the panel and myself that adequate protection of public health is not only the risk posed by water being produced, but also the side effect of producing the water, one of which is energy consumption. Next. And to be protective of public health holistically, the state board needs to be cognizant of the over-engineering of treatment barriers that result in excessive energy use. While the panel agrees that DDW's intent is to keep the criteria broad enough, while we agree, to cover all forms of DPR, there are clear features that distinguish RWA and TWA that warrant further consideration by DDW within the draft criteria. Next. As we discussed at the last meeting, we broke into various work groups and started considering the different parts, and of other criteria as they're related to a particular work group, but not ignoring the fact that there's significant overlap between various criteria sections. But in summary, our notes on pathogen criteria so far indicate that we need further clarification on handling the multiple conservative assumptions to develop the log reductions. On source control, we're seeking further clarification on how the enhanced source control is evaluated and the rationale for justifying the draft criteria language. Online wastewater collection system monitoring, we're suggesting that DDW include criteria that encourages the investigation and future development and application of this concept through pilot programs, rather than full-scale recommendations across the board. Next slide. Monitoring disease surveillance programs or community rural wastewater surveillance monitoring. Initially, our comment or our notes is to focus on developing a program of close communication and coordination with local and state public health agencies, as well as major hospitals within the DIPRA service area, rather than disease surveillance or wastewater surveillance monitoring. On optimizing secondary treatment, the panel strongly notes that criteria need to result in producing a stable, high quality water for the advanced water treatment facility. And that's under further discussion, or will be. Next slide. Alternative criteria. The panel's comment or notes so far are to expand that section such that it is not limited to just chemical treatment. The state board criteria should not inhibit the development of testing and eventual use of new technology. Under chemical criteria, ozone and BAC typically are separate processes, and the goals for each of those processes or the joint combination of them need to be clearly defined. Ozone BAC operates best before the RO process to manage low molecular weight compounds, which we described pretty thoroughly within the 2016 report. Next slide. Blending language is confusing and we need further clarification. Also, we're suggesting DDW consider including equivalency criteria within the document. For example, log reductions for specific low molecular weight compounds that may pass full advanced treatment. And then finally on TMF, we think further clarification and information on what's expected in the documentation, identifying key factors on how the plan will be reviewed and determining acceptability and the possibility of considering third-party review for the plan or portions of the plan by DDW. Next slide. And that concludes the quick summary of our notes so far. More to come. In the next series of presentations, DDW staff will be responding to some of these initial notes, and some of them are still under consideration for further comments and discussion with DDW. Thank you. And Jing, you can move on.
So next up, Jing, you've got the next presentation queued. Maybe.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, let me put the next slides up. Looks like we're ahead of schedule. Okay, let's see. Let's do this. Swap. There we go. Okay. All right, so yeah, we're going to do a couple of presentations that to address questions and comments that the panel had made from the last meeting and the other comments we've received. So Bob Hallquist, are you here?
I am.
Okay, all right, so that's so the topics we'll cover are addressing the raw water augmentation and treated water augmentation in the DPR criteria, and then Bob's going to do that presentation, and he's also going to do the next one, which is the pathogen treatment alternatives in DPR criteria, and then I will follow up with the drinking water distribution system requirements to address some questions. Okay, all right. So Bob.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand the panel has a concern over why we've written the criteria the way we have, and the fact we don't maybe fully acknowledge the benefits of raw water augmentation by having one set of criteria that seem to address treated water augmentation. So I'll go into that. I've included a couple of section numbers up there that I'll be sort of focusing on, showing how we accommodate raw water augmentation. And let's go to the next slide. So the statute, and I'm paraphrasing here, these are not the statutory definitions. California statute says that raw water augmentation is the planned placement of recycled water into a system of pipelines or aqueducts that deliver raw water to a drinking water treatment plant. And then treated water augmentation, the planned placement of the recycled water into a water distribution system, directly into the water distribution system for potable use. So the difference between raw water and augmentation and treated water augmentation, according to the definitions, could include things like transport time, might be part of a raw water augmentation project. Blending with an existing raw drinking water source could be part of a raw water augmentation project. And then it could have a surface water treatment plant. But none of these features are necessitated by the definition. And we cannot assume when we write the regulations that raw water augmentation features and their public health benefits are included unless those are specified. So the next slide, please. So we have a number of options available to us as we write these regulations. We could develop a raw water augmentation regulation, perhaps by building on the raw water augmentation definition, to specify clear benefits that could occur, such as a minimum blend and the existence of a surface water treatment plant. Recognize the definition doesn't say surface water treatment plant, it says water treatment plant. But these choices would narrow the scope of the statute and require certain justification of those minimums. Now, we do know that MET and other projects have offered substantial dilution as part of a raw water augmentation project, and dilution with an existing approved source of drinking water. And they offer very effective surface water treatment, which is effective at controlling pathogens. But not all raw water augmentation projects would be so advantageous unless the definitions were elaborated on. Indeed, we've had proposals that were that would meet the definition, statutory definition of raw water augmentation, but provide no real public health benefit as far as their raw water augmentation features. Another alternative is we could develop one set of criteria with giving consideration for any of the raw water augmentation features and benefits. Regardless of the approach, the health protective features of raw water augmentation must be understood and must be able to quantify them if raw water augmentation and treated water augmentation are to be considered in a consistent risk management approach. Therefore, we must know how to write the criteria for both types before writing criteria for either type. The State Water Board, we have chosen to develop one comprehensive direct potable reuse regulation that would cover both sets of both approaches to direct potable reuse in one set of criteria. Next slide. So how in the one set of criteria do we give consideration of the raw water augmentation benefits that may be present? First, we recognize that blending dilutes wastewater contaminants. So it's can be a very reliable treatment mechanism for both, certainly for chemicals and perhaps pathogens. So we have a section designated there to allow blending to eliminate the need for the ozone BAC treatment. The ozone BAC must be designed to reduce specified chemicals by 1 log. A 9-to-1 dilution accomplishes the same thing. So if the reclaimed water contribution is only 10% of the water being supplied to the distribution system, that means the ozone BAC is not necessary. So we have that written into the criteria. Also, in that same subsection, we acknowledge that blending can be used to reduce the fraction of the flow treated by ozone BAC. In other words, when the blending is within a certain range, you can just treat a side stream of the reclaimed water. So blending to dilute the reclaimed water between 9-to-1 and 1-to-1 allows a fraction of the reclaimed water flow to be treated such that the entire flow meets the 1 log treatment objective. Dilution less than 1-to-1, entering into the equation that we have in the criteria, really offers scant treatment downsizing benefit. And we don't allow that option with very minor blending. So the 1 log reduction would be met through a combination of dilution and treatment. Next slide, please. Another blending credit that we give is to blending would be allowed to reduce the threat from discharges of low molecular weight chemicals. So, and that was mentioned early in our presentations originally on chemical control. Reclaimed water TOC limit of 0.5 milligram per liter is set to control the magnitude of low molecular weight chemical discharges that could pass through the RO into the permeate. An equation is used in the criteria to allow blending to be taken into account as a mitigation for this threat. If the RO permeate is going to be diluted, then a higher TOC level in the permeate is tolerable. There may very well be more blending benefits that can be justified by specific raw water augmentation project proposals. But these are the 3 that we've included in the regulation. Next slide, please. We also acknowledge that if the treatment plant being provided in raw water augmentation is indeed a surface water treatment plant, we want to facilitate giving log reduction credits for those processes. So as we say in the criteria, every process has to be validated, but we certainly recognize in the criteria that approved validation methods for membranes and disinfection are fully recognized, the same ones that were used to give the credits under the surface water treatment rule. And for the media filtration validation, which is not well identified in any guidance, we accept pilot testing for that validation effort. Other reclaimed water augmentation benefits for specific projects associated with specific project features can be used to offset other requirements in the regulation, but we don't have any specific list of those. Those will be developed as projects demonstrate them, and then other successive projects can take advantage of that. So that's why we approached the regulations the way we did as far as raw water augmentation and treated water augmentation, and what we've done directly in the criteria to accommodate the raw water augmentation features. Are there any comments, questions from the panel?
This is your opportunity, panelists. Any questions for Bob? I'm not hearing any.
No,
This is
questions or complaints?
I just had a question. If you're calculating dilution differently for microorganisms versus chemicals, because one's a particulate where a chemical is not, and some of the dilution calculations I've seen didn't consider that effect, or that they may interact as particulates, clumps, or go right to the surface of water if they're very hydrophobic. So I was just kind of wondering, because I ran across those issues with oxidation ponds where the viruses really didn't blend the same way as the chemicals did.
Yes, and we don't directly acknowledge that in the criteria that dilution or blending can be used to provide log reductions for pathogens. Frankly, I think there's a lot of questions about how that should work. And I think we'd be more comfortable allowing that as an alternative approach to providing log reductions that could be justified on a case-by-case basis, at least initially, and probed, the concept probed by a independent advisory panel. I mean, one of the questions that I haven't been able to resolve is when you're blending two streams of water to dilute some contaminant like a pathogen concentration, what concentration do you use for the dilution water, the diluent water? It's obviously very variable. It's also very variable potentially for the other, the partially treated stream you're blending with. I don't know how to do that. And you've raised another issue that I hadn't thought of, but I think there could be a whole series of questions on whether and to what extent blending or dilution is appropriate for log reduction. I notice, I believe it was used, the only time I've seen it used in a risk calculation was in the 2012 NRC report on reuse in the appendix, where they assumed a certain amount of log reduction due to blending in groundwater recharge project. But I'd have to go back and read that a little more carefully, see how that was done.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions? I see a couple of folks with their microphones on, but I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay, good. I think Bob, this would be a good time. Let's move on to the pathogen treatment alternative section.
Very good. So let's bring up that slide.
There we go.
Yes, and I also understand in this addresses one of the bullets in Adam's presentation of that we address alternatives for chemical treatment, but not for pathogen treatment. Next slide, please. So we do allow alternatives for chemical treatment, but for chemical treatment, we specify the actual treatment processes that have to be used. The RO, the ozone BAC, two processes, and the AOP. It has been suggested, I know, by at least one person in the panel, that we allow alternatives to pathogen control treatment requirements. We didn't think it was necessary because we didn't think we were specifying treatment processes. The criteria require that log reductions be validated for whatever treatment the project proposes to use. Next slide, please. The subsection I've identified in the title promotes multi-barrier treatment by requiring for each pathogen type at least 4 treatment processes that must provide a minimum of 1 log reduction and no more than 6 log. The 6 log requirement is in there to make sure we don't have over-reliance on 1 or 2 individual processes. So the section does not limit the number of treatment processes that can be used to meet the log reduction targets. The section does not require that each process achieve at least 1 log. Only 4 of the processes have to achieve 1 log, so that you could have, several modest barriers that cumulatively contribute significantly to the log reduction targets. Such things as conventional wastewater treatment, some drinking water treatment processes, and natural barriers. So there's a lot of room in that criteria for other processes using other approaches. Next slide. There we go. Okay, this subsection promotes the use of diverse treatment mechanisms and specifies the use of 3 mechanisms that have been demonstrated to be effective for indirect potable reuse. Those are membrane separation, chemical disinfection, and UV disinfection. The section does not require that the specified treatment mechanisms provide all or even most of the required log reduction. That could be provided. Other treatment mechanisms, whatever they are, could be used for the bulk of the required log reduction. So we don't feel we're being restrictive, overly restrictive certainly, on the use of certain specified mechanisms or treatment processes to meet the log reduction targets. Next slide, please. Now we do specify, as I've said, chemical treatment processes that have to be used. And substantial log reductions are achieved by the required pathogen reduction mechanisms due to the requirement for these chemical treatment processes, the ozone BAC, RO, and AOP. Should alternatives be demonstrated and improved for these processes, the requirement for diverse pathogens could have more significance. So right now, very significant log reductions are provided just by the required chemical treatment, but that may not occur in the future as new alternative technologies for the chemical control may be in good time approved, justified and approved. Next slide, please. So any treatment that can be properly validated can be used, and the mandated treatment mechanisms for pathogens need not dominate the treatment train. We don't believe the pathogen control requirements significantly impede the validation of innovative technologies for pathogen log reduction. It is, of course, easier, and will be for some time, to use treatment processes that have already been validated for indirect potable reuse projects, including the FAT treatment and many conventional wastewater and surface water treatment processes. So that's all I have on that. Comments, complaints, concerns from the panel?
Well done, Bob. Okay, Chuck, I see your microphone on.
Yeah. Bob, why 3 mechanisms rather than 2 or 4 or 5?
You know, I don't think I've got a, it's just a judgment that we wanted at least at those 3 because they've played such an important role in the projects that we've feel are safe and become comfortable with in indirect potable reuse.
Okay.
Any other panelists with questions for Bob on this review of the pathogen criteria? Going once? Going twice? Bob, I believe you are off the hook at this point in time.
Well, let me
And
just add one more thing. That was too easy. We've struggled in our work group quite a bit with this issue of mechanisms. We've got a very brief definition of mechanisms in the criteria, and we've explored, you know, having longer lists of mechanisms, but we don't want to limit the number of mechanisms that could be considered in the future. And any advice on other mechanisms that somehow should be acknowledged in the regulation or how they might be used in the regulation, that would be appreciated. Okay.
excellent, so noted. All right, I appreciate it, Bob. Thank you very much on behalf of the panel and the chairs. And I think now the next piece of the presentation will now transition in terms of the presenter to Jing Chao, who's the senior sanitary engineer and the technical specialist on this project. And she is going to review some of the drinking water distribution system requirements that have gained the attention of the panel. So Jing, take it away.
All righty. Okay, so you know, there were questions and concerns brought up at the first panel meeting, you know, that we didn't you know, have requirements addressing impacts of DPR water on the distribution system. And so, you know, we have studied the this issue and have included in the proposed criteria, you know, in section, I think 110, requirements to address corrosion control and stabilization. And I'll go through that at the end of this presentation. But you know, in addition to the section 64669.110, we have existing drinking water regulations, you know, and we feel that, you know, these drinking water regulations related to the distribution system provide the necessary requirements, review and oversight for distribution system, water quality and control. And, you know, including control of, you know, the disinfection byproducts, microbial stability and whatnot. So these requirements apply to public water systems throughout the state, you know, which serve drinking water from a variety of sources and source qualities. So I'm going to go over some of the, you know, major regulations that govern distribution system water quality. First of all, you know, I think a lot of you know this is the lead and copper rule, and you know, which is in our regulation 64670. This is part of the drinking water regulations. So as part of this lead and copper rule, primarily, you know, public water systems must demonstrate optimized corrosion control. So this is an existing regulation, you know, talking specifically about lead and copper. So, so it's optimized to reduce lead levels, copper levels, while maintaining, you know, the water quality below drinking water standards. So a large public water system must conduct a corrosion control study unless it can demonstrate through water quality monitoring data that it has already optimized for corrosion control. And for medium and small public water systems, they must conduct corrosion control study if required by us. And this we would usually require it if we see problems in their data, that they're finding. So the lead and copper rule, has a requirements for the corrosion control study procedure, and they're listed here. It includes evaluating the effectiveness of treatment or combination of treatments, such as adjustments for alkalinity, pH, or calcium hardness, or addition of a corrosion inhibitor. And it must evaluate using pipe rig loop tests, or metal coupon tests, or even a partial system test where they could isolate this part of the distribution system and do the testing. You would measure water quality parameters before and after applying the treatment, to see what's what they have before, what they have after, what the effects of applying this treatment is. And they measure lead, copper, pH, alkalinity, calcium, conductivity, corrosion control, inhibitor levels, and temperature. They need to identify constraints that limit or prohibit the use of a proposed treatment. They need to evaluate the effects of the chemicals used for corrosion control treatment on other water treatment processes that a system has. And then, at the result of the study, they recommend a corrosion control treatment based on what they see to us for review and approval. And then, as part of that process, we look at the data, the water quality parameter data, and then we specify the acceptable limits or range of values of applicable water quality parameters related to the control of corrosion in the system. So yeah, just briefly, that's what the procedures that water systems follow when they're conducting a corrosion control study, and things like this would apply to a DPR project also. As that part of the lead and copper rule, they, as part of demonstrating the optimized corrosion control, they do the lead and copper monitoring in the distribution system. So there's an action level that they have to meet for lead and copper, and it's calculated using the 90th percentile value that they find, in the homes that they sample. And the number of samples is based on the size of the public water system, ranging from 5 to 100 homes under standard monitoring, or 5 to 50 homes under reduced monitoring. And they select representative sampling locations. They collect samples at the tap. And the selection of these sites are risk-based, using information from pipe plumbing materials and age and type of structures homes to kind of focus on areas where they might expect lead and copper leaching to occur. And the sampling frequency, it's when the system starts, they collect 2 consecutive six-month sampling rounds, and then followed by 2 annual rounds, and then triennial rounds. And they can go to reduce sampling frequency if they don't exceed the 90th percentile action level. So that's how that goes. And they also have to do water quality parameter monitoring. These water quality parameters I mentioned earlier, as appropriate, so that they know and we know that they are operating within the bounds of optimization. Sorry. And for if they exceed the lead action level, they have to notify the residents. They have to investigate the source and look at the source and potential for a source treatment if it's coming from the source. They have to install treatment if they find that it is from the source, or they might have to do, well, they'll have to do a corrosion control study, and again, if they haven't done one before, and try to basically fix the problem. Then they return to the standard lead and copper monitoring, which is more frequent monitoring, 6-month monitoring, if they were on reduced monitoring before. And they have to put out public education information, and if they find they have lead service lines and that's causing the problem, then there's provisions for them to do lead service line monitoring and replacement. So going on to the total coliform rule, or the most recently California adopted revised total coliform rule. So, generally it has requirements to control bacterial growth in the distribution system. And they do have, the coliform bacteria monitoring at representative locations based on system size and population served. So, for a large water system, I think greater than 50,000 people served, that kind of system, it would range between 60 samples per month and 480 samples per month for the largest system. So, this is weekly sampling, and they go throughout the distribution system, collecting these samples from, representative locations. And, if they find any coliform positive samples, they have to repeat the sampling to confirm, and they go upstream and downstream of where they originally sampled to see, try to basically locate where the potential contamination is coming from. And they, trace that back until they find something, or if they don't find anything, then, then they determine compliance based on the samples that they have. So, in this process, they also are able to detect significant rise in bacterial counts, if they keep sampling and they keep finding total coliform, and they we think that it's a potential contamination event, and then we do things like notify the people, the customers, water order or whatnot. So then other actions follow from that. Public water systems have to submit a total coliform rule monitoring plan, and that includes all this information, and we evaluate it and make sure it's it adequately covers their service area, and we'll be able to detect any deterioration of water quality in the distribution system. Going on to the surface water treatment rules, for that there's a requirement to maintain a disinfection residual in the distribution system, and it's meant to control bacterial growth from Legionella. There's residuals monitoring at the entry point and at representative locations in the distribution system also. So it's, the minimum, I think, is 0.2 residuals go into the system, and then there's got to be a detectable residual at 95% of the samples collected in the distribution system. Some systems also sample for HPC bacteria. And for the purposes of, if they see a residual is less than detectable, but if they have a HPC that's less than 500 coliform units per mil, then that counts as saying that a residual is detectable. So that's a part of the rule. So we have residuals monitoring, and then the next rule is the disinfectants byproduct rule. So, you need to maintain a minimum residual, but then, you don't want the residual to be so high that you form THMs and HA5s, which are also a concern. So, as part of optimization, there's, these disinfection byproduct rules. So, water systems do an initial distribution system evaluation, where they kind of blanket their system to identify hotspots where THMs and HA5s are higher. And a lot of times, these are at the low flow areas, or areas where they have a lot of storage and not a lot of use and that kind of thing. So water systems kind of know the hydraulics of the system really well, and the usage patterns. So, they go around and they identify these hotspots, they verify that with monitoring, and then they submit a monitoring plan to us for review. And that monitoring plan, it specifies either typically quarterly or annual sampling frequency, depending on the size of the system and type of water they're treating. And then they do, disinfection byproduct monitoring at the hotspots in the distribution system. And the number of samples is usually 2 to 20 in the distribution system, depending on the size for standard monitoring, and I think it's between 2 and 10 for reduced monitoring. And then, as part of that rule, there's also disinfection byproduct precursors monitoring if it's a surface water. So, if to control THMs, if it's too high, then they look at the source and see what treatment is needed to reduce the amount of precursors in the source water. And there's treatment techniques specified for the control of the precursors, which are TOC reduction requirements, that kind of thing. And then lastly, there's the regulations governing the distribution system itself. These are under the California Water Works standards. We have water main materials and installation requirements, pipeline separation requirements. We have requirements for tank materials and construction, flow meters, flushing valves, isolation valves, air valves, and that kind of thing. So there's all these requirements to make sure that what the materials they're using is not going to deteriorate water quality, and to maintain good life and reliable service and that kind of thing. And then as part of the California Water Works standards, there's these water system operations and maintenance plans that we can require a water system to develop as needed. And so this water operations and maintenance plan includes schedules and procedures for flushing water mains and inspection of water mains, tanks, etc. A program for control of organisms in water mains, that kind of thing. And something like that. And a nitrification action plan is kind of an example of an operations and maintenance plan that controls water quality in the distribution system. So in addition to those, existing criteria that we have in regulation for the distribution system and distribution system monitoring of water quality and other things, we have added for the DPR criteria, corrosion control and stabilization requirements. So that includes that that a DIPRA shall provide water that is stabilized as agreed upon by the DIPRA and the public water system receiving the advanced treated water or finished water. So, because the DIPRA, it could be an agency that is just supplying the water that does not have its own, distribution system. It needs to coordinate with the public water system that's receiving the water to make sure that, the water is properly stabilized so that it does not cause problems down the line. So we want to catch it, ahead of the game before they start seeing water quality impacts in the distribution system. So they have to coordinate and figure out what the best water quality is for the public water system. And then under B, prior to delivery of water, the DIPRA and the public water system receiving the advanced treated water or finished water, they shall jointly submit a corrosion control and stabilization plan to the state board for review. And so we'll review and improve it, and we'll look how it addresses the impacts resulting from the introduction of advanced treated water. And then we require some plan elements in here, such as the plan needs to include information on how they are going to maintain chemical and microbial stability in the drinking water distribution system as the drinking water quality changes with anticipated increases in the fractions of the finished water, and that's introduced by the DPR project. And so, this acknowledges maybe if the existing rules do not talk about chemical stability, for instance, or if there are other factors regarding chemical stability or microbial stability that's introduced by the DPR project, then this kind of covers that. And 2 and 3, it talks about maintaining the treatment effectiveness through the water treatment plant, as the source water quality changes. And then 3, it talks about what assessments that must be performed prior to and during operation of the PD project with respect to paragraphs 1 and 2. So, what the plan is and how they're going to assess whether it's working or not. Which necessarily includes monitoring and that kind of thing. And I think that's all I had for this distribution system, and I hope it addresses some of the questions that you have regarding, whether the issue is taken care of by this reg or other drinking water regs. So, if you have any questions,
Well, thank you, Jing. I see George, you're already up. Take it away, George.
And I wanted to ask what the rationale is on corrosion control. For medium and small systems, you only require it, the testing is only if required. It seems to me that people in these small and medium-sized systems could be just as exposed to risk. And I don't understand why I understand in the past why small systems have been differentiated, but if we're looking for issues of lead, what's the rationale for eliminating or limiting these small and medium-sized systems?
Yeah, that part comes from the lead and copper rule we have originally. I think it's from the 1990s. So I think it's a lot of the regulations. They take into account the economics of things. So they often the requirements are slightly different for the smaller systems because of capability and that kind of thing. But I can't speak to why EPA required that. Why they do that, but I think it's well, must be that.
I'm just wondering, should you do that in these regulations?
No, yeah. These regulations, if it's a DPR project, I think we will. We require in this section, right, that they have a plan. So it's not that it's optional for DPR projects. So for DPR projects, yeah, they will have to do this. And when we know that there is going to be a problem or there could be a potential problem, then we will tell even a small system that they need to do the study. So,
Well, if the large systems test routinely, shouldn't I just worry about these small systems, many of which have been installed early on and are going to have problems.
Yeah, the small systems also monitor, right? So that they because the system's smaller, in size, and they don't necessarily need that many monitoring points for a lot of these. So I think some of that it's based on the size. It's like, well, you don't need 10 points for a system that's only one pipeline long, kind of thing. So I think some of that is some of the differences in requirements between large and small are based on that. Like lead and copper, I think, yeah. I think the minimum size for even for the smallest system is 5 homes, and they can't reduce. Yeah, even under reduced monitoring, it's still 5 homes.
Jing, can you clarify what you just said about you would be requiring for small systems that are receiving DPR water that they do a corrosion control study? Because what you show in your slide is if required by DDW. Are you saying right now that if they're receiving DPR water, they would be required?
If they are, let's see, according to our draft criteria, they have to have a plan for corrosion control and stabilization, right? And I think as part of that plan, they have to tell us how they're going to be doing this, what the issues are. And at some times, that could include going out and collecting samples and doing studies, right? So that requirement could be covered under, would be covered under this section. Like if they don't do it, we'll say, hey, you have to do it. We're telling you to do it. but I'm not going to say, you know, as a blanket that I'm going to require it all to happen. It's here in the requirements.
Thanks, Jing. Panelists, more questions for Jing while we're talking about the drinking water distribution system and quality issues. Adam, Jim, anything from your side?
Nothing from me, Kevin.
No, I'm good. I think Mike had a good question to clarify.
You know, let me ask one quick question. You know, how many systems that are likely to consider DPR are there in California that still have lead service lines?
Good question.
Do we know that?
No, I mean, in my experience, I have not come across that service lines.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, any more questions for Jing? Again, I want to take advantage of the opportunity, and we're well ahead of schedule at this point. Although I believe we only have one public comment. I didn't want to take advantage of this time that we have with the DDW staff and encourage any of the panelists to ask any questions. Seems like we've exhausted our inquiries on the information that's been presented today. Are there any other more generalized inquiries that we want to make now with this additional time that we've been gifted?
Well, Kevin, I mean, I'll throw out one other one for Jing, which I know came up on, you know, the panel that we first had. So if there's blending between reuse water and the second source of supply, what are in the regulations? I don't recall that you proposed to require the utilities to check chemical compatibility with the distribution system at the various possible blend ratios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you know, these rules that we have, like surface water treatment rules, right? It's like if you're blending two different sources of water, you know, public systems will typically look at the two sources and make sure that, you know, when they blend, they will not have introduced a problem where they lose residual in the distribution system. So, you know, they will try to, you know, come up with a plan to either stagger the flow or to introduce it to a small area or to do flushing or, you know, or things like that to make sure that when those two waters come together, they don't somehow lose their residual.
So I'm not thinking about residual as much as, and I'm not really the corrosion control expert here, but you know, if you have chemically distinct waters that you're blending and you have a distribution that's stabilized with respect to the chemistry of one of the waters, and now you change the ionic composition,
yeah,
at least there's a theoretical potential for readjustment of any scale that's been laid down in the system.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so, you know, they would if they qualities are different and they note that, you know, then we can say, look, it's a new source of water, you know, so we have to permit that new source of water, and before we permit it, we will tell them that they need to do a study to make sure that they don't come up with problems in the system.
If I could say something here, this is Dick Bull. I think this is a major hole that we probably haven't thought about before. I think it's good for George to brought it up, because what I would see in most cases, DPR projects are going to be serving large populations. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have a large population being served, but maybe segments of that population or portions of those cities or whatever they are will not have ever done corrosion control. And you've got a changing circumstance. So maybe just as a suggestion, maybe we need to think about saying that's one of the things they need to investigate before they begin DPR.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is clearly different than, you know, a small city in Eastern Oregon or something like that, that's got its own water system and a couple hundred people connections. This is, I think it's more likely to be a portion. The problems are more likely to be in a portion of the homes in a larger population.
I see. Yeah, thanks for the comment. Yeah, I'm thinking that, the way we do permitting, if the source comes in to the system, and we think that the water quality is different, enough from what they're used to, that we would say tell the system to do a corrosion control study or do some kind of testing to make sure that, even for that portion of water being served to that area, that it would not, cause them to have problems with, lead and copper or residuals or back T growth or anything like that. So, but I think it still can be done under existing regulations.
Yeah, this is it's certainly not an issue unique to potable reuse. We have this problem with systems switching from groundwater to surface water in portions of their system, and
True.
introduce desal water. So we'll just have to make sure, this doesn't slip through the cracks, and we've definitely required in their engineering report that they address the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Jan, can I ask a question on 64,683 that you have up there? Shouldn't you include temperature in that first item?
Temperature, yeah. Okay, yeah. Oh, okay, so the temperature is included here under water quality parameters. Oops.
I understand that, but
yeah. So this top
but
part.
It's important in terms of alkalinity and pH and all the rest.
Right, yeah. This first bullet is talking about the type of treatment you would apply to control corrosion. So like alkalinity adjustment, you can do a treatment to adjust the alkalinity or adjust the pH. So are you saying if you adjust the temperature, it would be a treatment for corrosion control?
Well, it plays a significant role. I mean, what about aesthetics and temperature? In other words, let's say that most drinking water is provided at 40 degrees C, and now you're going to have 68. Should cooling be included in that list?
Yeah, so we have secondary standards that cover aesthetics, but temperature is not one of the parameters for aesthetics for drinking water.
Well, I think it would be a shock if you opened the tap and it had tepid water. If you were in Florida, that would be different. But here, our water is normally cooler. If all of a sudden you had warm water, you'd think something was wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I've measured water coming out of my tap in 80 degrees in the summer in San Diego, and it's freezing now in the wintertime. But it can be a large change. Yeah. And I know water system operators, they are sensitive to that. When there's temperature changes, they start looking at the residuals and that kind of thing. So, but I don't recall whether temperature is such a consideration for lead and copper rule, other than they need to make sure that when they measure their water quality parameters and in their treatment, they consider temperature, so that we can say, well, the temperature in your system is typically this range, so you have to maintain this temperature within acceptable limits, range of values for your system. If you have a source of water that's a different temperature, then then they would have to relook at the corrosion control.
And Jane, this was something that came up during the advisory panel report when the feasibility report first came out years ago, that projects should look at the temperature, but it would be project specific. And we didn't see that the actual temperature was a public health issue. It was more of a aesthetic, something that the project can have to address with their customers.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions from the panel? Joan, I see your camera on. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to ask whether there was anything new on the horizon in regard to Legionella monitoring that would impact any of this. I noticed, I mean, you know, the surface water treatment rule, of course, had the historical, if you keep a disinfection residual, you'll control Legionella, which we know is not the case yet. And I know that there's interest in looking further at this, but I didn't know if you knew of anything, Jiang, that's on the horizon.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. We've asked. I haven't heard anything.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
I have
Jack.
a question.
Yeah, take it away.
Hi. I kind of want to change gears a little bit and talk about public notification, Jim. I think it's section 64669.125. And in that section of the last draft in August, it talked about the procedures and what was required, but it didn't have any timelines in there. I'm wondering what DEW staff thinks about adding timelines so that we can be confident that the public is insured in a timely manner when there are system problems with the system.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that question. So yeah, we have this public notification section here. And the reason we don't specify timelines is we're using the same timelines as the public notification sections in this chapter 15, article 18. So yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so we have referenced, 64663.1, which is I think tier 1 notice for the following.
As an example, do you happen to know what the timelines are in those chapters?
Okay.
Those articles?
So yeah, I think tier 1 is immediate notification. So we have 3 tiers. Tier 1 is immediate notification. Tier 2 is within 30 days, and tier 3 is you can send it out, with your consumer confidence report, so that kind of thing. So if it's an acute health risk, health hazard, like the one that we're seeing here, if they go below 16, 10, 11, then we consider that acute. So they have to provide a tier 1 notice. So that's what the section refers to.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any other questions, clarifications on the material that's been presented today, or any other lingering issues that panelists have been thinking about? I'm not hearing any. And we are at 11:17 a.m. And Mr. Chairs, I would say that we have a scheduled public comment session at 11:30. The question would be, should we go ahead and initiate that public comment session now and be able to adjourn earlier, or should we take a break now and come back and have the public comments right at 11:30? I'm open, but I don't know what our rules are exactly. I think that we're not governed by any specific time certain rule. I just want to be courteous to the 2 folks who have indicated they want to make a public comment.
Okay, Kevin, I was just going to say, how many people want to make a public comment? And if it's a lot, let's go for it. And if it's a little, actually, just a couple, then we might as well go for it and get done early.
My tendency would be to agree with that too. Is there anyone who feels like that's not an appropriate step to take right now?
I think there might be some concern about public comments being received prior to the scheduled time in case somebody wanted to plug in specifically for the public comments at a time certain.
Yeah, that reflects my concern precisely, and Mike and I have a similar experience set here. And while I would love to be able to be efficient and get done, I also don't want to create unnecessarily create some kind of a problem with the process. So why don't we?
Kevin?
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
How many public commenters are there?
There are 2 commenters.
Just 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed with Kevin and Mike. I think if we said 11:30, you can't cut it off before, because some people may call in at 11:30.
Right.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to use my discretion as your facilitator, and you can throw things at me later. Why don't we take about a 10-minute break? Actually, let's take an 8-minute break. We'll get back on at 11:28, and then we will initiate the public comment precisely at 11:30. We'll conclude with that rather quickly, I think, depending on how long the comments are. Then we can then we'll move to our next phase of the meeting. So let's take a break. We'll log back on at 11:28. We'll see you back here, I should say, at 11:28, and then pick up our public comments. Thank you for being flexible, and I really appreciate all the extra information. Bob, Jing, and the DDW staff really appreciate your support. I know you've been working extremely hard over the last few months on to respond to these initial comments, and we've got a lot of work left to go. But as Adam started off with his comments, I think that we've been really happy with the level of interaction between the panel and DDW staff. I think everybody's very engaged, and I want to recognize, acknowledge, and thank you for that. We'll log back on at 11:28.
Kevin, do we log into the same GoToMeeting?
No, I apologize. We don't need to log in. Everybody need to just mute yourself, turn your camera off, and then I will call everybody back to order at 11:28. And I apologize for any confusion there.
Good. Sounds good.
just want to give everybody a 1 minute warning. If you can hear me, we will recommence the meeting and the public comments here in about a minute. Okay, welcome back to meeting number 2 of the Division of Drinking Water's expert panel for DPR. We're now going to move into the public comment session of this meeting. And I want to go over the rules for that engagement to make sure that we get all interested parties an appropriate opportunity to have their comments heard. So we have these requirements that will be in place until we conclude the public comments, and they'll conclude on their own dynamic. But we need you to send an email to this address, ddwrecycledwater@waterboards.ca.gov. In the subject line, please indicate that you're sending and want to comment on the DPR criteria, expert panel meeting number 2, and then let us know your name, who you represent, whether you're going to jump in by video conference or phone, and if you're going to come in by phone, make sure that you give us the last 3 digits of your phone number from which you intend to call so that we can identify you and bring you up when it's your turn to comment. That's the rules. I believe that we are, let's see, I'm going to check my notes here yet. Okay, good. Then I'm going to wait just a couple more seconds, but we still have, I actually have 2 still, yeah. And the first one we're going to go to is Chad Plantenberg. Chad represents himself and the folks at DDW who can pull him up. He's going to participate by email. I believe we can pull him up now.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Chad, we can hear you. I assume this is you, and indeed I can see that it is.
All right, sweet. Thank you for taking my comments. A quick item, just kind of based on the discussion day, addressing the panelists' concern about corrosion control. Just wanted to note that, in my opinion, the draft regulation probably adequately addresses their concerns. The requirements to conduct a study in the proposed regulations, if they haven't already conducted one because of the LCR regulations, are going to identify as issues a number of the concerns the panelists were bringing up. So I think that I think that the state's proposed regulations are probably appropriately concerned there. But the other comment that I don't know maybe is not going to be popular here, but I just want to thinking about the human right to water and effects of climate change. I just have concerns that the regulations as drafted are going to preclude communities that need access to DPR most from accessing them. Specifically, my concern is the requirement of AWTO 5 level under all conditions. So I think one way of alleviating it would maybe be like smaller or less complex projects, having the capacity to like lean on a AWTO 4 or maybe even a 3 requirement. My logic is that just small, I think that it's small remote communities that are going to need or benefit most from DPR. And they just that are not going to have realistic other alternatives, not large enough to tap water resources like hundreds or thousands of miles away, or store quite a bit of water, like in a massive reservoir, to make indirect potable reuse realistic. And then because of the remoteness, like it kind of precludes consolidation as an option as well. And so the thing with the AWT-05 is smaller communities struggle with attracting and retaining talent as it is anyway. And I think you could probably do it with minimal risk, just because smaller plants, even though the mechanics of constituent removal remain kind of equally complex, oftentimes a smaller plant is able to use a more kind of palletized or off-the-shelf type of product that is in operation simpler to perform. You could go to like USA Blue Book and whatnot and get a palletized UV system and whatnot. And so yeah, so I think that's a way of maybe making it a little more accessible to medium to smaller communities without drastically increasing risk. So thanks for taking my comment.
Thank you, Chad. I appreciate it. Your comments reflect the difficulties of regulating direct potable reuse in the largest state of the nation. Okay, excellent. I think our next comment, and our last comment that I'm aware of, and I'll rely on my staff to let me know if we get any more, I believe is from Jennifer West. Jennifer, let me know you're here, and then we'll kick you off.
Kevin, this is Suzanne. I'm on the line with Jennifer West. She's still trying to get into the meeting, so give me one moment to try to get her in.
Thank you. Yeah, this is one of the places where when we meet in public, or when we meet in person, doing public comments are very easy. This remote dynamic has interjected a whole new set of technical and procedural challenges. So I appreciate your efforts, Suzanne. And I also know Jennifer's panicking right now.
Hello?
Jennifer, we can hear you. Welcome.
Oh, I am so sorry. I thought I was logged in earlier, but I was not. I apologize. So excuse me. All right. I missed the last commenter trying to deal with this, but let me just I have a few quick comments here if you'd like me to start.
Sure, Jen, I just let you know that the initial commenter, Chad Plantenberg, had some questions, comments, and concerns related to small and medium-sized systems and their importance in the DPR matrix as we implement.
Okay, great. So let me start here. First I want to thank Bob Holquist for the explanation about differentiating between raw water augmentation and treated drinking water augmentation. We do think that there's benefits for raw water augmentation that extend beyond the elements he discussed, the blending elements in the regulations. So we'd like to see some of those credits extend towards reduction in requirements regarding source control and staffing. I think he mentioned in his presentation, one of the key differentiations is the issue of timing and transport time for raw water augmentation. We think that should be considered as you look at the whole package of regulations and the differentiations. Also appreciate that there was issues with the statute on this issue, and so I'm acknowledging that for next time. So another comment would be looking at your pathogen LRV requirements. And again, we appreciate that you did put out an addendum explaining the method behind the current requirements. We just continue to recommend that the panel further review the justifications, since we're not sure that the information gathered in DPR2 on raw wastewater concentrations or DPR1 evaluating microbial risks were fully taken into consideration. with those LRV requirements. And then finally, I'd like to discuss the alternative clause. We'd like to see the alternative clause more closely mirror the alternative clause that was in the groundwater recharge regulations, which was for the entire regulations. The alternative clause in this regulation package just is for the chemical control section. We think we need something broader for the life of the regulations. We think that if we want these regulations to be as elastic as they can, we should make this similar to what DDW has done in the past in this area. So with that, again, thank you. And I really appreciate this discussion, and it's helped me understand various elements of the regulations much better. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Suzanne, I'll ask now if you've received any additional folks who will want to make a public comment.
I have one more email that was just forwarded to me from DDW, and we're trying to sort out if the person wants to speak. So please give me one moment.
Okay, I will do that. Please enjoy the silence. For any of you that have had a career in the public service, you can appreciate this story. We did back in my earlier career where we worked for the city of Chula Vista, we wanted to rename a street that had 5 different names and even intersected with itself on the way out to the brand new Olympic Training Center. We did about a year's worth of work to change the name of the road. We met with community groups for over 100 groups during the course of a year. And we thought we had all worked out until the public comments came. So I would say that the public comments that we're receiving on the work that you've done thus far are of the variety that I would put in the category of useful and helpful. I'm happy about that because of my experiences. So yeah, this is great. Suzanne, are we ready now?
One moment, I'm trying to contact the person via phone. Okay. We can move on, Kevin.
Good. Suzanne, I really appreciate your efforts. Make sure that we have that commenters or that potential commenters information. If there's anything that we need to do to follow up or to close the record on that we have the information necessary to do that. Thank you.
Will do.
Mr. Co-Chairs, that concludes our agenda for the public meeting today. I'd like to hand it back to you for any final closing comments before we release all of our participants with a thank you for all the hard work that's been done to accommodate this meeting.
Do you want to say anything, Jim, first?
Yeah, I will. I also want to thank everyone for attending this meeting, particularly DDW and their staff. They put a lot of work into their information that they presented to us today, and we're really grateful for that. And I think all of the talk, I think we've learned a lot today, you know, so like on alternatives, should we look at not only chemicals, but other constituents in there, that sort of thing. Because there's lots of things that I won't go into detail that we should and will discuss among ourselves and have further contact with DDW. But I just think they did a great job in their presentations. Adam?
Yeah, I agree, Jim. I think some of the clarification they provided, DDW provided, will help the record going forward. It also will help us as a panel identify which things we still need some clarifications on and which things we're ready to make some recommendations on.
Right, I agree with you.
Excellent. Any comments from panelists before we close it down, or anyone from DDW? Anything else for the record before we log off here?
Hi, yes, this is Jing. Let's see, I got a email from Cheryl Hamlin. She commented last time, and she sent in a comment that you know, she understands that Scottsdale, Arizona has a pilot DPR program based on the 2018 Arizona DPR framework. She has two questions. Has NWRI been studying this pilot? If so, what has been learned? And two, should the Arizona framework be revised in light of COVID? And I will forward this email to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. For everybody's information, yeah, NWRI did some extensive work in the state of Arizona that concluded in the 2015-16 timeframe, maybe even a little later than that, that resulted in a number of recommendations for Arizona's potable reuse regulations. I'm not clear about the level of implementation of those regulations, and that was and is a standing issue in every state where NWRI works. The level of resources applied to these regulatory concepts for potable reuse are simply insufficient to go through the difficult process sometimes of writing regulations. So we've tracked and we're aware of the work in Arizona. We're aware of the project that exists in Scottsdale, but we haven't done any critical assessment of it and don't have any plans to do so. That doesn't mean that we won't get an opportunity to do so in the future and that it wouldn't be valuable. And if the co-chairs or DDW so directs, we'll present that information for the board to consider, or I should say for the panel to consider. So hopefully that is a responsive take on the question.
All right. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, thank you, everyone. I want to echo the comments of the co-chairs. Lot of work by DDW, by the panelists, by the co-chairs and the NWRI staff. I really want to thank you to all the stakeholders in this process. This is an incredibly important work, and I'd like to submit to you that all the easy stuff is already done. So we're going to continue to work through these complicated issues together. We're going to find a solution that works for this great state of ours. I want to thank everybody for their time today. I encourage you to reach out to me personally with questions or comments, any concerns you have with the facilitation. We always want to be better at this work, and we look forward to seeing all of you again, if not before, then on January 26th for meeting number 2. And I want to wish everybody that I won't see until then a very, very Merry Christmas and happy holiday season, wherever you may be around the world. So thank you very much. This concludes the public portion and the entirety of meeting number 2 of the DPR Criteria Expert Panel. Thank you very much for your participation, and we will talk soon. Goodbye.